The evening began quietly in the peaceful town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, where the cool autumn wind carried the smell of fallen leaves through the streets and the warm lights of houses slowly turned on as night approached. In a small but cozy home near the edge of town, 32-year-old Claire Mitchell stood in her kitchen finishing dinner while soft music played from a small speaker on the counter. Claire had built a calm life over the past few years. She worked as a counselor at the local high school, helping teenagers face their fears and confusion while quietly managing the memories of her own past heartbreak. Years earlier, she had trusted someone who promised her a future, only to watch that promise slowly fall apart. Since then, Claire had learned how to protect her heart carefully, focusing on work, friendships, and a peaceful routine. Yet there was one person in her life who had slowly become impossible to ignore: Ethan Parker. Ethan was 34, kind, thoughtful, and someone Claire had first met during a community volunteer project 5 years earlier. What began as simple teamwork gradually turned into a steady friendship built on late-night conversations, shared walks through town, and an understanding that neither of them needed to explain too much because the other already understood. Over time, Ethan had become someone Claire trusted deeply, the one person who could make her laugh after a difficult day. That evening, Claire was placing 2 plates on the table when a soft knock sounded at the front door. She already knew who it was. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there wearing a dark jacket and holding a small bakery box with a friendly smile on his face. "I brought dessert," he said. Claire laughed softly and stepped aside to let him in. "You always bring dessert." Ethan shrugged playfully. "That's because you make dinner." The easy conversation between them felt natural as always, but something subtle had been changing between them over the past few months. Neither had spoken about it, yet both could feel it in small moments. Longer eye contact, quieter pauses in conversation, and a growing awareness that their friendship had quietly grown deeper than either expected. They sat down at the kitchen table and began eating while talking about their day. Claire told Ethan about a student who had finally gained the confidence to apply for college, while Ethan shared stories from his work as an architect designing small community buildings in nearby towns. Their conversation flowed easily, the way it always did. But tonight, Ethan seemed distracted. Several times he stopped speaking halfway through a sentence as if he were carefully choosing what to say next. Claire noticed immediately. "You seem quiet tonight," she said gently. Ethan smiled faintly but looked down at his plate for a moment. "Just thinking." Claire tilted her head slightly. "About what?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "A lot of things." After dinner, they moved into the living room where a warm lamp lit the quiet space. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows, carrying the distant sound of leaves moving across the pavement. Claire sat comfortably on the couch while Ethan stood near the window for a moment, staring out at the darkening sky. Something about his posture made Claire curious. It looked like he was trying to gather courage for something important. Finally, Ethan turned around and spoke in a calm but serious voice. "Claire, can I tell you something honest?" Claire looked up at him with curiosity. "You always can." Ethan walked slowly toward the couch but didn't sit down right away. Instead, he rested one hand on the back of a chair and took a deep breath. "We've known each other a long time," he began. Claire nodded. 5 years. Ethan smiled slightly. "Yeah, 5 years." For a moment, he looked like he might change the subject, but instead he continued. "And during those years, you've become one of the most important people in my life." Claire felt a small warmth in her chest hearing those words, though she still wasn't sure where the conversation was going. "You're important to me, too," she replied softly. Ethan nodded, but the seriousness in his eyes remained. "That's exactly why this is hard to say." Claire sat up a little straighter, sensing the weight behind his words. Ethan finally sat down across from her, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "I've been trying to ignore something for a long time," he admitted. Claire waited quietly. Ethan looked directly at her before speaking again. "My feelings for you changed." The words were simple, but powerful. Claire felt her heart beat faster as she realized what he meant. Ethan continued speaking before she could respond. I didn't want to risk our friendship, so I kept telling myself it was just a passing feeling, but it didn't pass. Claire listened silently, surprised yet strangely calm. Deep inside, she knew Ethan wasn't someone who spoke carelessly. If he was sharing this now, it meant he had thought about it for a long time. Ethan's voice softened slightly as he continued. The truth is, I care about you more than just a friend. Claire looked down at her hands for a moment, processing the words. For years, she had carefully avoided emotional risks, convincing herself that friendship was enough. But now the possibility of something deeper stood directly in front of her. Ethan leaned back slightly and ran a hand through his hair, looking both relieved and nervous. I didn't plan to say this tonight, he admitted, but sometimes feelings grow to the point where you can't pretend they aren't there anymore. Claire looked back up at him slowly. She noticed how sincere he seemed, how his usual calm confidence had been replaced by a quiet vulnerability. That alone told her how much courage it had taken for him to speak. Ethan, she said softly, though she wasn't sure what words would come next. Ethan raised his hand gently. You don't have to answer right now, he said quickly. I just needed to be honest. The room fell into a thoughtful silence as the weight of the moment settled between them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees while the quiet town continued its peaceful night. Claire realized that their friendship had reached a point where things could never return to exactly the way they were before. Ethan had crossed an emotional line by speaking the truth he could no longer hide. Yet instead of feeling afraid, Claire felt something unexpected, curiosity about what might happen if she allowed herself to trust again. And as she sat there looking at the man who had been beside her through so many years of friendship, she began to wonder if the night that started like any other ordinary evening might quietly become the moment that changed both of their lives forever. The quiet living room felt heavier after Ethan spoke the words he had kept inside for so long, and for a few seconds, neither he nor Claire moved. The soft lamp beside the couch cast a warm light across the room, while the autumn wind continued brushing gently against the windows outside. Claire sat still, trying to process what had just happened. For 5 years, Ethan had been one of the most reliable people in her life, the friend who showed up when she needed support, the person who never pushed her to move faster than she felt comfortable. Now he was sitting across from her with a calm but nervous expression, waiting for a response she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Ethan finally broke the silence with a quiet sigh. I hope I didn't make things uncomfortable, he said carefully. Claire looked up at him and shook her head slowly. No. It's just unexpected. Ethan nodded as if he understood completely. That's fair. He leaned back slightly in the chair and folded his hands together, trying to remain calm even though his heart was beating faster than usual. For months, he had imagined this moment, wondering how Claire might react if he ever told her the truth. Now that the words were finally out, he felt both relieved and vulnerable at the same time. Claire stood up from the couch and walked toward the window, needing a moment to think clearly. Outside, the streetlights illuminated the quiet road where fallen leaves moved gently across the pavement. Her mind raced with memories from the past 5 years, late-night conversations, shared jokes, quiet moments walking through town after work. Ethan had always been there, steady and patient, never asking for more than friendship. She realized now that the signs had been there all along, small moments where his care went deeper than simple friendship. Claire turned back toward him slowly. How long have you felt this way? She asked softly. Ethan looked down briefly before answering. Longer than I wanted to admit. Claire walked back toward the couch but remained standing for a moment. Why didn't you say something sooner? Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. Because I knew you were still healing from your last relationship. Claire felt a quiet wave of emotion hearing that. It was true. The painful breakup years earlier had made her cautious about trusting people again. Ethan had seen that clearly, yet he had never tried to push her past her comfort zone. Instead, he stayed by her side as a friend, giving her the space she needed to rebuild confidence. You respected my boundaries, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. You deserved that. Claire sat down again, this time closer to him than before. The distance between them felt smaller now, though the uncertainty in the air remained. But something changed, she said gently. Ethan took a deep breath before responding. I realized that staying silent forever would be dishonest. Claire looked at him carefully. So tonight you decided to take the risk. Ethan laughed softly. I guess you could say that. The honesty in his voice made Claire's heart soften. She could see that he wasn't trying to pressure her or rush her feelings. He had simply reached a point where hiding the truth felt wrong. You're brave, she said after a moment. Ethan shook his head lightly. More nervous than brave? Claire smiled faintly at that. Another quiet pause followed as both of them reflected on the conversation. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice thoughtful but calm. I always trusted you more than anyone else. Ethan listened closely, unsure where her words were leading. When my last relationship ended, she continued, I promised myself I wouldn't rush into anything again. Ethan nodded, understanding her caution. That makes sense. Claire looked directly at him now. But the strange thing is, I never felt afraid when I was with you. Ethan blinked in surprise. Really? Claire nodded slowly. You were always patient with me. You never tried to change who I was or force me to move faster than I was ready for. Ethan felt a small warmth spread through his chest, hearing those words. Claire took a deep breath and continued speaking. I think that's why tonight feels so surprising, not because your feelings are wrong, but because I never stopped to think about what mine might be. Ethan remained silent, giving her the space to express herself freely. Claire leaned back slightly against the couch. For years, I convinced myself that friendship was enough, she said. It felt safe. Ethan nodded slowly. And now? Claire looked at him again, her expression thoughtful but gentle. Now I'm realizing that sometimes the safest place might also be where something real is waiting. Ethan's eyes widened slightly as he tried to understand what she meant. Claire smiled faintly at his reaction. I'm not saying I have all the answers tonight, she added quickly, but I am saying that what you told me matters. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. That's more than I hoped for, he admitted. Claire laughed softly. You set the bar pretty low. Ethan smiled. I just didn't want to lose you as a friend. Claire looked at him warmly. You're not losing me. The reassurance in her voice made Ethan feel a quiet sense of relief. The night had taken an unexpected direction, but the connection between them remained strong. After a moment, Claire stood up and walked to the kitchen before returning with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Ethan and sat back down beside him. Maybe we don't need to figure everything out tonight, she said calmly. Ethan nodded in agreement. Sometimes things grow naturally if you give them time. Claire looked thoughtful for a moment before smiling slightly. But I will say one thing. Ethan raised an eyebrow with curiosity. What's that? Claire looked directly at him, her eyes calm and sincere. I'm glad you didn't keep your feelings hidden forever. Ethan felt his heart lift at those words. For the first time since he spoke earlier that evening, the tension in the room began to fade. The conversation shifted into a softer, warmer tone as they continued talking about their past memories and the friendship that had slowly built the foundation for something deeper. Outside, the wind carried the sound of rustling leaves through the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge. Inside the small living room, 2 people sat closer than before, both realizing that a new chapter of their relationship had quietly begun. Ethan had crossed the line of silence by speaking the truth he could no longer hold back, and now Claire stood at the edge of a choice she had once been too afraid to consider. The night was far from over, and before it ended, she would face a decision that could transform their friendship into something neither of them had dared to imagine before. The night in Claire's living room slowly moved forward, but something important had already shifted between her and Ethan, and both of them could feel it in the quiet space around them. The conversation that followed became softer and more honest than anything they had shared before. They talked about memories from the past 5 years, small moments that once seemed ordinary but now felt meaningful. Claire remembered the winter evening when her car had broken down and Ethan drove across town in heavy snow just to help her. Ethan remembered the time Claire stayed up late helping him prepare for an important presentation when he felt overwhelmed at work. Those memories were simple, yet they showed how deeply their lives had already been connected. As the clock moved closer to midnight, the house felt calm and warm, and Claire realized something surprising. Instead of feeling nervous about Ethan's confession, she felt safe. For so long, she had been careful with her heart, building emotional walls after the painful relationship that once left her broken. But Ethan had never tried to climb those walls or force them down. He had simply stayed beside her long enough for trust to grow naturally. That quiet patience was now making her see him in a different light. Ethan noticed the thoughtful look on her face and smiled gently. "You're thinking a lot tonight?" he said. Claire laughed softly. "I guess I am." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Is that a good sign or a bad one?" Claire paused for a moment before answering. "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out." Ethan nodded calmly. "Take all the time you need." Claire looked at him carefully, noticing how calm he seemed now compared to earlier. The nervous tension in his voice had disappeared, replaced by the steady kindness she had always known. "You really meant what you said earlier, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Every word." Claire studied his face for a moment. "Even if I needed time to think?" Ethan smiled. "Especially then." Claire felt a warm feeling in her chest hearing that. The honesty between them had created a new level of closeness, and the more they talked, the more natural it felt. After a while, Ethan stood up and walked to the window again. The night outside had grown darker, and the quiet town of Cedar Ridge looked peaceful under the streetlights. Claire joined him a moment later, standing beside him as they looked out at the calm road. "It's strange," she said thoughtfully. Ethan glanced at her. "What is?" Claire crossed her arms lightly. "I spent years trying to protect myself from getting hurt again." Ethan listened closely. Claire continued, her voice gentle. "But the person who made me feel safe enough to trust again was standing beside me the whole time." Ethan looked surprised by her words. "You mean me?" Claire nodded slowly. "You never rushed me. You never asked for more than I was ready to give." Ethan shrugged slightly. "I cared about you. That was enough reason." Claire turned toward him now, her expression calm but sincere. "Do you remember the day we first met?" Ethan smiled instantly. "The volunteer project at the community center." Claire laughed quietly. "You were trying to fix a broken table." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck playfully. "And failing badly." Claire nodded with a teasing smile. "Very badly." They both laughed at the memory, the sound filling the quiet room with warmth, but then Claire's smile softened as she looked at him again. "That day I thought you were just another kind stranger helping the community," she said. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "And now?" Claire took a slow breath before answering. "Now I see someone who has been quietly standing beside me through some of the most important years of my life." Ethan felt a deep emotion rise in his chest hearing those words. For years he had hoped Claire might see him this way, yet he never expected the moment to arrive so naturally. Claire continued speaking softly. "I think part of me was afraid to see you differently before." Ethan looked curious. "Why?" Claire gave a small, honest smile. "Because if I admitted how much you meant to me, I would also have to admit how much I could lose." Ethan understood immediately. Love always carried risk, and Claire had already experienced that pain once before. "But tonight something changed," she added quietly. Ethan's voice became gentle. "What changed?" Claire looked directly into his eyes. "You were brave enough to tell the truth." Ethan felt his heart beat faster again. "And that made you see things differently?" Claire nodded slowly. "It made me realize that sometimes the biggest risk is pretending your feelings don't exist." Ethan remained silent for a moment, letting her words settle. The air between them felt calmer now, but also deeper, like the beginning of something meaningful. Claire walked back toward the couch and sat down again, and Ethan followed a moment later. The distance between them felt smaller than it had earlier in the evening. Claire looked thoughtful before speaking again. "I spent years believing that love always arrives loudly and suddenly," she said, "but maybe sometimes it grows quietly without us noticing." Ethan smiled gently. "That sounds a lot like what happened here." Claire nodded with a small laugh. "Exactly." The clock on the wall ticked softly as midnight passed, marking the quiet turning point of the night. Neither of them had planned for this conversation when the evening began, yet now it felt like a moment that had been building slowly for years. Claire looked at Ethan again, her expression calm but full of new understanding. "You said earlier that you didn't want to hide your feelings anymore," she said. Ethan nodded. "That's right." Claire leaned back slightly and took a slow breath. "Then I think it's only fair if I stop hiding mine too." Ethan's eyes widened slightly with curiosity. "Claire, what are you saying?" Claire smiled softly, though her voice remained calm and thoughtful. "I'm saying that maybe our story was never just about friendship." Ethan's heart raced as he listened carefully. Claire continued slowly, choosing her words with care. "For a long time, I told myself that what we had was simple and safe." Ethan waited quietly. Claire looked into his eyes once more before finishing her thought. "But tonight I'm starting to believe that the feelings we've been avoiding might actually be the beginning of something much bigger than either of us expected." The room fell into a gentle silence again, but this time the silence felt hopeful rather than uncertain. Outside, the night remained calm, yet inside the small house, two hearts stood on the edge of a new chapter neither had planned, but both were finally ready to face. And as Ethan realized what Claire's words might truly mean, he understood that the next thing she said could change both of their lives forever. The quiet moment after Claire's words felt different from anything Ethan had experienced before, because in that silence, he realized something important was finally changing between them. For years, their friendship had been steady and comfortable, but now the truth they had both avoided was standing clearly in front of them. Ethan looked at Claire carefully, trying to understand the meaning behind her calm expression. Claire did not look nervous anymore. Instead, she looked thoughtful and peaceful, as if she had finally reached a decision she had been slowly moving toward for a long time. Ethan spoke softly, almost afraid to break the moment. "Claire, what are you feeling right now?" Claire smiled gently, the warm lamp beside the couch reflecting in her eyes. "Relieved," she said. Ethan blinked in surprise. "Relieved?" Claire nodded slowly. "For years, I told myself I needed to stay safe. I convinced myself that if I never risked my heart again, I would never feel that kind of pain again." Ethan listened carefully, remembering how guarded she had been when they first met. Claire continued speaking with calm honesty. "But tonight, I realized something important." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What is it?" Claire looked directly at him. "I realized that the safest place in my life has always been with you." Ethan felt a deep emotion rise in his chest hearing those words. He had hoped for many things, but hearing Claire say that meant more than he could easily express. Claire took a slow breath before continuing. "You never rushed me. You never tried to fix my past. You just stayed." Ethan gave a small smile. "That seemed like the right thing to do." Claire laughed softly. "Most people don't have that kind of patience." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Maybe I just believed you were worth waiting for." Claire felt her heart warm at the simple sincerity of his answer. The quiet honesty between them made the room feel calm and safe, like the beginning of something real rather than a dramatic moment that would disappear in the morning. Claire stood up and walked slowly toward the window again, looking out at the peaceful street. The autumn wind had slowed, and the town of Cedar Ridge looked still and quiet under the soft glow of the streetlights. Ethan remained seated, but watched her carefully, sensing she still had something important to say. After a moment, Claire turned back toward him. "Do you remember the promise I made to myself after my last relationship?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "You said you wouldn't let yourself rush into love again." Claire walked back toward the couch and sat beside him, closer than before. "That promise helped me heal," she said calmly. Ethan listened quietly. Claire continued, her voice steady. "But I think I misunderstood something about that promise." Ethan looked curious. "How so?" Claire smiled gently. "I thought protecting my heart meant keeping it closed." Ethan nodded slowly. "And now?" Claire looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "Now I think protecting my heart means giving it to someone who will care for it the right way." Ethan's breath caught slightly as he understood what she meant. Claire didn't rush her words. Instead, she let the meaning settle naturally between them. "For 5 years, you've shown me kindness, patience, and honesty," she said. "You never asked for anything in return." Ethan shook his head softly. "Your friendship was already enough." Claire smiled. "Maybe it was for a while." Ethan looked at her carefully. "But not anymore?" Claire's expression softened, and she spoke the words that had slowly been growing in her heart throughout the night. "Not anymore." Ethan felt a quiet wave of emotion move through him as he realized what Claire was truly saying. Claire continued speaking gently, her voice calm but sincere. "Tonight you were brave enough to tell the truth about your feelings." Ethan nodded slightly. Claire looked directly into his eyes. "So now it's my turn to be brave, too." Ethan's heart beat faster, but he didn't interrupt. Claire took a slow breath before finishing her thought. "I think what we've been building all these years isn't just friendship." Ethan waited quietly. Claire smiled softly and spoke the words that finally removed the last wall between them. "I think it's love." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt warm and peaceful rather than uncertain. Ethan stared at her for a moment, making sure he had heard correctly. "Claire, are you sure?" he asked gently. Claire nodded without hesitation. "I'm sure of one thing," she said. "I trust you." Ethan felt a deep sense of happiness spread through him, the kind that grows slowly rather than arriving suddenly. For years, he had respected Claire's healing process, never wanting to pressure her or change her pace. Now, the choice had come from her own heart, and that made the moment even more meaningful. Ethan reached for her hand carefully, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted, but Claire didn't move. Instead, she gently held his hand in return. The simple gesture felt more powerful than any dramatic words. "We don't have to rush anything," Ethan said quietly. Claire smiled. "I know." Ethan looked at her warmly. "But I'm glad we're finally being honest." Claire laughed softly. "Me too." The clock on the wall showed that the night had moved far past midnight, yet neither of them felt tired. Instead, they felt like two people standing at the beginning of something new, something that had quietly grown over years of trust and friendship. They talked for a while longer about their hopes, their fears, and the future they might slowly build together. Nothing felt forced or rushed. Everything felt natural, like the next step in a journey that had been unfolding long before either of them realized it. Eventually, Ethan stood to leave, pausing at the door as Claire walked him outside. The cool night air brushed gently across the quiet street, and the stars above Cedar Ridge shone brightly in the clear sky. Ethan looked at Claire one more time before stepping toward his car. "Tonight changed everything," he said softly. Claire nodded with a peaceful smile. "Yes, but in the best way." Ethan smiled back before getting into his car and driving slowly down the quiet road. Claire watched until the headlights disappeared around the corner. As she walked back into her house, she realized something important about the night that had just passed. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet everything had changed. A friendship that once felt simple had quietly grown into something deeper, something built on years of trust, patience, and understanding. And for the first time in a long while, Claire no longer felt afraid of the future. Instead, she felt hopeful, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful love stories begin not with sudden sparks, but with two people who spend years learning how to truly care for each other before finally admitting what their hearts have known all along.